everyone, it's Sam from Sulu in collaboration with Voltage, and today we're going to talk about how to integrate L402 monetized APIs into your browser applications. And we will use a variety of technologies. We will use, of course, Lightning, powered by Voltage nodes. We at Sulu are very happy to have partnered with Voltage for our node infrastructure. We will use L402 APIs that are monetized through the Sulu platform using the Lightning Labs L402 protocol. We'll go into some detail on that. And finally, we will use WebLN wallets, in this case, the Alby wallet. So we'll put all these technologies together in order to create a weather application that will demonstrate how you can consume L402 APIs from the browser. And in the process, we will learn a lot about these technologies, especially how L402 APIs work and how they can be integrated into your applications. So let's get started. First of all, some housekeeping. In order to follow along, the code is available in our repository, which will be linked in the description. And you will also need access to an internet connection. You will need access to Node.js and NPM. We will use JavaScript for this tutorial. And so we will use Node.js and the NPM packet manager. We will also use a WebLN wallet to test our application. Now you can use any WebLN wallet you want. For this tutorial, we will use Alby, and we will connect the browser wallet to a Voltage node in the backend. For those of you that don't know, Voltage is an enterprise-grade infrastructure provider for the Lightning Network, and they allow you to create and manage your Lightning nodes in a completely non-custodial way. We have collaborated with Voltage since the beginning. They run the Sulu nodes, and they're just amazing to work with. So if you are new to Lightning or you're trying to find a way to get started, Voltage is the place to start. You can set up a node very easily. They have a free trial, and you can start playing around with this technology. So let's take a look at what we're going to build. We're going to build what we call Lightning Network Weather. It is a simple weather application that tells you the weather of a city. So you type the name of a city, for example, Budapest, and then you click Get Weather. In the backend, it's calling an L402 API to return the weather data. This API is monetized using Lightning Labs L402 protocol that uses Lightning to pay for access to data in a usage-based programmatic manner. And the API is monetized thanks to the Sulu platform. Maybe it's convenient to take a look at how Lightning L402 works. So I'm here in the Sulu documentation, and we have a section that introduces L402. So if you look here, we have the API consumer and the API provider. And the protocol works in the following manner. The consumer, which is the orange part here, makes a request to the provider. This is when we call the weather API to ask for the weather of a specific city. This API is Lightning gated. You need to pay in order to access the data. So the provider returns with a 402 error. The 402 error is just like a 404 error. Maybe you have accessed a website and you type the URL wrong, and then you get 404 not found. The 402 is similar, only the 402 means request for payment. You need to pay in order to access this resource. And when you use L402, what the provider returns is a macaroon and a Lightning invoice. The invoice contains all the data needed to make a Lightning payment to pay for this API. And the macaroon, it's like a token. It's like a very cool cookie. It basically contains within itself the permissions that will be activated once you pay the invoice. So in our case, when we call the weather API, what gets returned to us is a request for payment containing an invoice that we must pay before we get access to the weather data. Once the consumer, in this case our weather application, pays that invoice through the Lightning Network, we receive a proof of payment, which is the pre-image of this Lightning payment. We can use it as a proof of payment, and I won't delve too much into the details of the protocol. For more information, you can check our documentation, or the Lightning Labs documentation is very detailed. But basically, once you provide the proof of payment to the provider, then the request can go through, and then you get the weather information that you requested. This is a very programmatic, flexible way to pay for API resources without having to deal with API keys, deal with credit card subscriptions. You can pay even per request, and you can leverage the power of Lightning to pay using microtransactions, as you will see in this demo. Maybe it's good to go through a little demonstration, practical demonstration of what's going on in the background with L402. So for this, we will use the live demo that's provided by the Sulu documentation. And if you're watching, I invite you to follow the link and follow along. It's really informative. For this demo, we're going to use a different API that simply returns a random number. We will call the API, and you can copy it into your shell, into your terminal if you want, or we can also do it from the browser. And we will try to fetch a random number. But what we see is that when we try to access this API, we get a payment required error, basically a 402 error. And if we inspect the headers that we get back, we see this www authenticate header with an L402, a macaroon, and an invoice. This here is the invoice that we must pay in order for the macaroon to work, in order for us to be able to access the data behind this API. So let's pay this invoice. For convenience, the documentation shows it here, so you can just copy to the clipboard. And here I'm going to use our Alby wallet, a wallet that is already present in the browser and that I can connect to a voltage node that I have running on our backend. So I have already done that. If you haven't, Voltage has very good documentation on how to link your Alby wallet to their Voltage node. It's super simple, just 2 steps. And if you don't have Alby, you can use any WebLN wallet that has some balance and that is connected to the main Lightning network. So I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna click send. I'm gonna copy paste the invoice. It tells me that it's requesting 10 Satoshis, which is less than 1 cent, very small microtransaction. And I'm gonna click pay now. As soon as the payment goes through, I can look for the pre-image. So I'm gonna go back to my list of transactions. This is the last one I have done. I'm gonna click on it, open it, and then copy paste the pre-image. This is my proof of payment. The fact that I have the pre-image proves that I have paid the related invoice. So I'm gonna copy paste the pre-image. I'm gonna paste it here. And what this documentation will do for you is help you build the Lightning API token, the L402 token. That includes the macaroon that we got initially in the header and the proof of payment, which is the pre-image. So once we have that assembled, we use it to authorize the API. So here you see we are repeating the same request to the same API, but we are appending this API key, which is made by the macaroon together with the proof of payment. Once we have this, we can retry the request, and voila, we get our data back, which is, in this case, quite boring. It's just a random number, but you can use this with any API you can imagine. So immediately you can see the usefulness of this protocol. You can use this protocol to monetize any API or any service in a highly programmatic way. Payments that settle instantly. You can implement microtransactions, which allow you to integrate pay-per-use or pay-per-time. You can even do dynamic pricing. Again, this is very programmatic because you're using Lightning invoices. So you can even change the price of your API depending on the nature of your request. If it's a query to a database, it could depend on the number of records that is being returned. If it's a call to a large language model, like ChatGPT, it could depend on the number of tokens that you're sending. The possibilities are really endless. But for now, let's focus on our Weatherman application. So for our Weatherman application, we're going to use this weather API, the Weatherman Sulu API, which takes in a very simple parameter. It just takes the city. So what we're going to do is build this application so that the user only enters the name of the city. We call this API, we pay for it. On the spot, we're going to use pay-per-use, and then we get back the weather data. So let's get to it. I'm going to open my terminal, and I'm going to copy the Weatherman demo repository, which you can find linked in the description. And if you read for example, the README, you can also find even more context on how to do this. The link would be in the description. So I'm going to start in a clean directory, and I'm going to clone this repository. Okay, then I will go into the directory, and I will open my code editor. And for this tutorial, I'm going to use Visual Studio. So we can explore the repository a little. As you can see, this is a Next.js application, although it has been kept very simple so as not to confuse users. We're using Tailwind CSS for the styling, and that's pretty much it. It's a very simple application. If I go into the source and I look at the pages, we see that there's only one page, which has a header and then has a current weather component. If I go into the current weather component, I see that here is where all the logic of the application resides. But before we do anything, let's first install all the dependencies so that we can build it and see where we are starting from. So I'm going to open my terminal here, and I'm going to install using npm. But before I do that, since we're using Next.js, I'm going to make sure that I'm running Node version 18.17 or higher. For that, in my case, I will use nvm. I will do nvm use version 18.17. In my case, I already had it installed, but if you don't have it installed or you don't have the latest version of Node, then please update it, because otherwise the code might not work properly. So once we have the correct Node version, I'm going to install the dependencies using npm. So npm I, and that will install everything. npm always takes a little while. We're used to that. And we are here. 0 vulnerabilities, how nice. And all the red marks have disappeared, which also makes me feel good. So I guess the first thing we can do is run the application as it is to make sure that everything is building. So for that, I'm gonna do npm run dev to run the developer version of the Next.js server. And you can see that it's serving on localhost port 3000. So I'm going to open that, and we'll see what we get. It has to compile a moment. Okay, so everything seems to be working fine. Even from the local version, I can already connect that to my Alby wallet with the voltage node, and I can try to make a transaction. So let's try to get the weather for Waterford, where I live. I'll get the weather, and immediately my Alby wallet pops up. I'll make the payment. So let's just check that everything is working, even in localhost. Okay, it went through, and everything seems to be working. So it wouldn't be fun if we have everything done. So in order to explain the process, we have created a branch, which is tutorial 1. So I'm just going to jump into tutorial 1. And then we'll work to build the functionality that is used with L402 from scratch. So if we go into the current weather component of the tutorial 1 branch, let's try to look for the place where we are making the call to the API. And I don't want to get into how we build this application, all the HTML, all the styling, because that is pretty basic. And this is not an HTML tutorial. So we'll just go immediately to where the important bits are, where we are making the call to an L402 API using our native JavaScript code. So if we go under source components, current weather, and look for the code that is making the API, we see that we have this fetch weather call. That for now, it's been hard-coded. We're not calling any API, because if we were to call the L402 API without any wrapper, without connecting to a Lightning node, then we will just get a 402 error. And in fact, just to demonstrate, it might be useful to demonstrate how that looks in the browser. If I come here and try to access this API, I can just do it from the browser and don't pay for it. What I get is a payment required, as it's expected. So we need a way to pay and access for this API from the code, from JavaScript. So for that, it's actually very simple. Most of the work is done already, thanks to client libraries. So for this tutorial, we are going to leverage Alby's Lightning tools, and specifically their fetch with L402 tool, to fetch the data from this API and pay using a WebLN wallet. So if I just go to their documentation, this is the Get Alby JS Lightning tools that will be linked in the description. I can scroll down to L402, and I see that they have a very nice fetch with L402 function that can just be imported like this. And if we look at the code, it actually looks very much like just fetching a normal API. Here we are just putting the URL that we want to get, some parameters, which we can go through, and then that's it. It should just work, right? So let's try it. Let's go back to our code. And we see that here we are just basically hard coding. If we go to how our app looks at the moment, if we go to how our app looks at the moment, every time we click get weather, we get the same weather all the time because it's hard coded. And that's not cool. We want to get the actual weather. So let's get rid of this, set weather. And let's try to implement the L402. So let's make sure, first of all, that we are formatting the city properly. We're getting the city from the front end. For that, we're just going to run a little replacement just to make sure that the user hasn't inputted anything weird. Okay. And then we'll try to get a response. So for that, we will use the fetch with L402. So const response is equal to await. It's an async call. fetch with L402. Simple as that. We are going to get from the documentation, the endpoint, which is weatherman.sulu, and then you put the city in the query. So we're going to put this here as the first parameter. And instead of city, we're going to substitute it with the formatted city that we got before. And this should be different. They should be these ones. So formatted city. Then we have the option to pass some parameters, which we're not going to pass in this case. And then we're just going to specify that the header key, it's going to be L402. And there's some historical reasons for this. When L402 was first implemented by Lightning Labs, the header key was LSAT, not L402. But then there was a whole story, I believe, with the LSAT lawyer examinations in the States. There was a name conflict, and therefore they changed this header key to L402. But the protocol must be backwards compatible, and that is why we specify that from now on, we're going to use L402 as the header key. It's actually done by default. We don't have to specify it, but I always like to add it to remind me of what we're doing. So once we have that, we just have to use the response. So in that sense, we're going to get the current data from the response. If we go here to our documentation, in the response, we get two objects, the location object and the current object. So we're interested in the current weather, the current object. So let's get that. We get the JSON for that. And then we just set the weather to current. And actually, let me just go to the original one and copy paste the different fields to make our job easier. I'm going to go back to my code, my original code. And I'm just going to copy paste this set weather. So we're using the set weather function that was defined up here. And we are setting each field that we want to display. The temperature, we're going to get it from current.tempc. The condition text, we're going to get it from, again, the same object, and so forth. This way, we have formatted all the data that we want from the L402 API. As you can see, it is extremely simple. We are just exchanging the fetch function to fetch with L402. All the L402 logic is done in the background, so you don't have to worry about how the payment is happening, how the user is going to connect the wallet to your application. You just need to use this fetch with L402. Everything else, it's already done for you. And I invite you to check the code for this function. It's open source. We at Sulu are also building clients, L402 clients for other languages, for Golang, for Python, for Rust, even for TypeScript to add extra functionality. Just to tell you guys that it really is so simple. So let's see if this is working. It's compiling fine. So let's go back to our browser and check if we have implemented the functionality. So now when I click get weather, magically I get the prompt from Alby to pay. In this case, it's 50 Satoshis, or around 2 cents. Again, I'm paying with my voltage node that is connected to my Alby wallet. If you want instructions of how to do that, visit the voltage page. They have very clear, super easy documentation to follow on how you can one, set up your Voltage node, and two, connect it to your WebLN wallet like Alby. And I'll just pay, make sure the payment is going through. It went through, and voila, I get the weather in Waterford. And just for you guys to not think that this is all hard-coded or something, let's try around another random city like Austin, Texas. Try to get the weather there. Again, I have to pay. And once the payment goes through, we get the weather in Texas, a little more hot than in Austin. And the way this API works is that once you have paid for a city, you can request the weather for that city again and again. And you won't have to pay again. So the API is set in a way that you only pay when you change the name of the city. And once you paid for that city, you just continue. You can continue requesting using the same macaroon and pre-image pair, and you will get the data that you paid for. Another cool functionality that I would like to mention is that you can actually set budgets with your WebLN wallet. So for example, if I don't want my user, or if I as a user don't want to keep being prompted to pay every time I change the city, I can remember and set a budget, let's say for 500 Satoshis. So this way, once I pay this one, and I want to change the city again, like Atlanta, it won't prompt me to pay again. It will automatically pay as long as it's within budget. You can see the notification there. So that is all that we needed to do to consume an L402 endpoint and pay with it through the Lightning Network using Bitcoin. And I just want to stop and think a little about everything that has happened, because I have opened a website that maybe I didn't know about, maybe I found it on a link, but I have opened it. I don't see any ads. Why don't I see any ads? Because me as the provider, as the person that have developed this website, I don't have to monetize it through advertisements. I don't have to monetize it through accounts. I can just give this to users. And any user that has a Lightning wallet can pay for the content using just a couple of Satoshis, less than a cent for a call. So this makes, one, the user experience very good. And two, it's very safe for me as the provider, because I can open source the code as we did. I don't have to expose any API keys. If you look at the code, there's no API key here. It's just a URL. The API key is, in fact, the payment. The payment is what allows the user to access this API. So from a security point of view, it's very safe. It allows more open source development without me having to worry about, okay, how to give you guys API keys so you can try this out, or how to set a free tier. Other people, what they do is you can have, I don't know, 50 calls for free. Well, that means I have to pay for them in the backend. With this, every API key is paid for, while at the same time, the users are practically paying nothing. They're just paying 1 cent, less than a cent, 2 cents, and they're not bothered with all the advertisements around the website. So it's a win-win. And therefore, that's why we think this is the future of the internet. This is how the internet and the API economy, it's going to be monetized. So I really hope you enjoyed and that you could follow along. If you got stuck at any point, you can check the main branch of our repository with the final code. And I really invite you to try this out, to develop your own applications. We are exposing APIs every day. If you have an API that you would like to monetize with L402, don't hesitate to reach out to Sulu. That's what we do. We help people monetize APIs with Lightning. And if you want to enter into this space and you want to start playing around with Lightning, maybe you're a company that wants to have their own Lightning node, then please check out the guys at Voltage. They're amazing. They have always been extremely helpful. We trust Voltage with our own infrastructure. All our nodes run on Voltage, and they have an amazing product. It's enterprise grade, non-custodial, and highly scalable. So when you're using Voltage, your money remains yours. They never have access to your money. It's fully non-custodial, which is the best place to start with Bitcoin. So with that, I will leave you guys. Please drop any comment on the description. Please tell us how it was. This is the first video we're making in this format. So if you like it, we'll make more. Tell us if you want us to explore any other application of L402. And if you're an API provider that would like to talk to us, please do. We're always open. And if you're a consumer that is interested in consuming any specific API with L402, then also reach out to us. With that, see you guys soon.